My name is Olivia Pina, captain in the United States Army. At 34 years old, I thought I had been trained to face anything. But no training exercise, no simulation, could have prepared me to stand before two freshly dug graves, my husband's and my daughter's, while the seats reserved for my own parents remained empty. As I was trying to breathe through the suffocating embraces of sympathy, my phone buzzed. It was my mother. She'd sent me a message by mistake. It was a picture of her and my father, beaming in Hawaii, with a caption meant for someone else. Finally escaped that dreary atmosphere. The white lilies there looked so cheap. That bullet didn't draw blood, but it killed the last living part of my soul. They thought they had buried their weak daughter that day. They had no idea they had just awakened a soldier. Before I tell you my story, let me know where you're listening from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe the cruelest betrayals always come from the ones you least expect. The Oklahoma wind was sharp that morning, carrying the scent of damp earth and coming rain. It cut straight through the wool of my Army service uniform, a cold reminder that I was still alive. Everything else felt numb. My world had narrowed to a series of precise, disciplined movements. Stand at attention, accept the condolences, keep my back straight, breathe. The ceremony was a blur of military precision and honor. The sharp crack of the 21-gun salute echoed across the plains of Fort Sill, each shot a physical blow to my chest. An honor guard, their faces impassive and respectful, performed the flag-folding ceremony with practiced grace. They transformed the symbol of a nation into a tight, heavy triangle of blue and white stars, a final, compact piece of my life with David and Sophia. A sergeant major, a man with a chest full of ribbons and eyes that had seen far too much, presented it to me. On behalf of the President of the United States and a grateful nation, he said, his voice a low gravel, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your loved one's honorable and faithful service. I took it. The weight of it was shocking, far heavier than folded cloth should be. The texture was rough against my white-gloved hands. My husband hadn't been a soldier. He was a civilian engineer who loved the Sooners and the ridiculous superhero movies he watched with our daughter. But because he was my dependent, my family, the Army honored him. The Army honored 7-year-old Sophia. The Army showed up for me. My eyes drifted from the flag to the front row. To the 3 empty folding chairs set beside me, one for my father, Norman, one for my mother, Ashley, one for my younger brother, Leo. They were meant to be my honor guard, my family. But they were just 3 empty spaces, a void of black metal and plastic that screamed louder than any rifle volley. Everyone saw them. The pity in their eyes was almost worse than the grief. They looked at me, a captain who led soldiers, and they saw an abandoned daughter. The ceremony concluded, and my commanding officer, a 2-star general whose presence was a profound honor, walked over to me. He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. Captain Pina, he said softly, his voice full of genuine concern. Did your family make it in time? The question hung in the cold air. All I could do was give the slightest shake of my head. Words wouldn't form. My throat had closed up, sealed tight with shame. The general's face softened with a deep, unspoken understanding. He simply nodded, gave my shoulder a final, firm squeeze, and walked away. His silence was more damning than any reprimand. In that moment, in front of the men and women I led, I had never felt so small. Back at our house on post, the silence was suffocating. The air was thick with the cloying, sweet scent of flowers, lilies, roses, carnations, sent by people who cared enough to fill the void my family had left. I walked through the rooms, a ghost in my own life. Sophia's little pink rain boots were still by the door. Her latest masterpiece, a colorful scrawl of our family as stick figures, was held to the refrigerator by a smiley face magnet. David's coffee mug, the one that said, "World's okayest husband," sat on the counter by the coffee maker, waiting for a refill that would never come. I finally sank onto the couch and pulled out my phone. I'd ignored it for days. There were dozens of texts, missed calls, and then I saw it, a social media notification. My mother had posted a photo. I clicked, a sick feeling already coiling in my stomach. There they were. My mother, my father, my brother Leo. They were poolside, somewhere tropical and bright. My mother was wearing a floral sundress and oversized sunglasses, a wide, carefree smile on her face. My father had his arm around her, a beer in his other hand. Leo was giving a thumbs up to the camera. The caption read, "Aloha from the Ramos family." The post was time-stamped. Yesterday. The day of the funeral. My breath hitched. But the worst was yet to come. A new text message popped up at the top of my screen. It was from my mother. It must have been a mistake, a text meant for one of her friends. Finally escaped that dreary atmosphere, it read. The white lilies there looked so cheap. Anyway, Leo really needed this vacation after having to endure the news about Olivia. Each word was like a drop of acid on my soul. Dreary atmosphere, my husband and daughter's funeral, cheap white lilies, the kind gestures of my friends and colleagues. Endure. As if my deepest agony was an inconvenience to my brother's vacation schedule. The shock was so profound it felt physical, like a punch to the gut that knocked all the air from my lungs. It pulled me back to the moment it all started. The gut-wrenching phone call from the base chaplain, the numb, frantic flight home, the walk down the cold, sterile hallway to the morgue to identify the two people who were my entire world. After that, my first instinct, my most primal need, had been to call my mother. I didn't want money. I didn't want her to fix anything. I just wanted to hear her voice. I wanted her to tell me it would be okay, even if it was a lie. I just wanted my mom. All I got was a hollow, distracted voice on the other end of the line. "Oh, Olivia, that's terrible," she'd said, her tone flat. "We'll see if we can get a flight." A blatant lie. They were already packing for Hawaii. The pain of losing David and Sophia was a tidal wave. This betrayal was the undertow, pulling me down into a darkness I didn't know existed. I slid from the couch onto the floor, the starched fabric of my uniform crumpling beneath me. I didn't scream. I didn't sob. The discipline of a soldier runs deep. But silent tears streamed down my face, hot trails on my cold skin. My phone screen had gone dark, and in its black reflective surface, I saw myself, a hollowed-out woman in a decorated uniform. I am a soldier. I live and die by a code of honor, loyalty, and duty. My loyalty to my family had been absolute, unquestioning, and they had thrown it away like trash. Right then, something inside me shifted. The grief didn't vanish, but it began to change its form. It started to cool, to harden, to crystallize into something sharp and cold. A soldier's resolve. My pain was meaningless to them, a nuisance, an inconvenience. Fine. From this day forward, I vowed to myself, their existence would be meaningless to me. This wasn't a war I'd asked for, but it was a war that had been declared on me, in my own home. There would be no guns, no battlefields, but it would be a fight for my honor. A fight for the memory of David and Sophia. A fight I intended to win. A week after the funeral, I began the heart-wrenching task of dismantling the life David and I had built. Surrounded by cardboard boxes and packing tape on the living room floor, the silence of the house was a physical weight. Every object was a landmine of memory. I picked up one of Sophia's toys, a small teddy bear missing an eye, and the present dissolved. The scent of cardboard was replaced by my mother's pot roast, and I was suddenly at our dinner table in Tulsa, a teenager trying to be invisible. They called my brother Leo the Golden Boy, and it was the simple truth. He was the sun our family orbited. I recall one evening, after bringing home a certificate for the honor roll, I placed it on the table, hoping for a simple, good job. But my mother, Ashley, was already in the middle of a breathless recap of Leo's latest high school football game. "You should have seen him, Norman," she gushed. "He made this incredible tackle. The crowd went wild. The coach says he's a natural." She slid my certificate aside without a glance to make room for the gravy boat. It was just paper in the way. My father would grunt in approval, his eyes on Leo. "That's my boy." When I was 14, I was awarded the Superior Cadet Medal in my JROTC program. I wore my uniform home, the medal pinned proudly over my heart. I showed my father. He looked up from his newspaper for a half second. "That's nice," he said, then turned to my brother. "Leo, you decide where you want to go for your birthday yet?" It was a constant theme. My achievements were footnotes, his were headlines. My path of discipline was seen as a strange rebellion, an embarrassing detour from the normal life they envisioned. Leo was their project, their legacy. I was an expense, a shadow that trailed their sun. The memories kept coming, each one a fresh cut. The worst ones surfaced from the depths of my mind. At 15, I was hospitalized with a severe case of pneumonia. I was feverish, struggling for each breath, and deeply scared. And my parents were packing for a road trip to Dallas. Leo had decided he wanted to be a rock star, and his band had an audition. I remember my mother's voice on the phone, thin and impatient. "The nurses are there to take care of you, Olivia. Leo can't miss this opportunity. It could be his big break." I hung up and stared at the ceiling tiles of the hospital room. The loneliness was colder than the fever. In that moment, I understood a fundamental truth. My health, my safety, was secondary to my brother's fleeting whim. On the unbalanced scales of my family, I would always be the lighter side, but another loss cut even deeper. It was about Major. He was a German shepherd I'd rescued, a beautiful, loyal animal I'd poured all my affection into. He was my one true friend, my constant shadow. He was the only creature on Earth who acted like I was the center of his universe. Leo, predictably, was jealous. One afternoon, I came home to find him crying, holding up an arm with a long, shallow scratch. Major sat by the door, looking confused. "He bit me," Leo wailed. "Major attacked me." I knew it was a lie. It was a clean scratch, not a bite mark. Major was gentle. I pleaded with my parents, explained, begged them to see the truth. But their verdict was swift and absolute. Leo was the victim. Major was the danger. The next day, I came home from school to a house that was too quiet. Major's bowls were gone. His leash was missing from its hook. I found my father in the garage. "Where's Major?" I asked, my voice shaking. He wouldn't look at me, just kept organizing his tools. "He's been taken care of," he said, his voice cold. "We sent him to a farm upstate. He'll have more room to run." The classic lie parents tell their children. I knew exactly what it meant. They had disposed of my only friend because of a lie. Losing Major hurt more than 1,000 ignored awards. It was a betrayal of a pure love I had nurtured, teaching me that in my family, truth had no value against their preferred narrative. These memories formed a map, explaining everything. My decision to join the Army wasn't just a career choice, it was an escape. A flight to a world where rules were clear, merit was rewarded, and your worth was measured by your actions, not your birthright. In the Army, I found a loyalty I had craved my entire life. My unit became my real family. Then I met David, a kind, steady civilian engineer who thought my strength was beautiful, not weird. He saw me. With him and our sweet Sophia, I finally built a home, a true one founded on love, a place where I was never a shadow. But now, sitting in the ruins of that life, the ghosts of the past were rising. That old, familiar feeling was crawling back, the feeling of being the outsider, the quiet girl who never quite mattered. I looked at the teddy bear in my hands. I thought of the empty chairs, the photo from Hawaii, the comment about cheap lilies. It wasn't one betrayal. It was a lifetime of them, 1,000 tiny cuts leading to this final, mortal wound. A cold resolve settled in my bones, cutting through the grief. This history, this geography of injustice. It had shaped me, yes. The past made me a soldier. But it will not hold me prisoner. It's time to clean house. It was 2 weeks after the funeral. 2 weeks of waking up to a silent house, of automatically making coffee for two, only to pour 1 cup down the drain. The air was still heavy with the scent of fading lilies, the ones my mother had called cheap. I was sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by a mountain of paperwork, death certificates, insurance forms, military benefit applications. Each signature felt like another shovelful of dirt on their graves. My focus was absolute, a shield against the grief that threatened to swallow me whole. Then, the doorbell rang. A sharp, impatient sound that sliced through the quiet. My heart sank. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, my entire past was standing on my porch. My father Norman, my mother Ashley, and my brother Leo. They brushed past me into the house as if they owned it. Their presence an immediate and unwelcome invasion. My mother's eyes scanned the stacks of cardboard boxes in the living room, and she actually frowned, a flicker of disapproval on her perfectly made-up face. There were no hugs, no gentle inquiries about how I was holding up. The sympathy, if it ever existed, had evaporated. Instead, my mother started with a hollow platitude, her voice smooth and rehearsed. "I know this is a difficult time for you, Olivia," she said, placing her purse on the counter, "but life must go on." It wasn't a comfort, it was an opening salvo, a prelude to an attack. I could feel the insincerity radiating from them like heat off asphalt. They sat down on the sofa, the same sofa where David used to read bedtime stories to Sophia, his deep voice rumbling as he did all the character voices. The sight of them there, in that sacred space, made my stomach churn. Leo, ever the center of attention, leaned forward with a smug grin. He launched into a pitch about his once-in-a-lifetime business opportunity. It was a trendy sports bar he wanted to open in Tulsa's Blue Dome district. He talked about craft beers and big-screen TVs, his words filling the quiet house with empty ambition. I just stared at him, numb. Then my mother, Ashley, cut to the chase. She turned to me, her expression a careful mask of maternal concern. "Leo needs $40,000 to get started, Olivia," she said, her tone leaving no room for discussion. "With your captain's salary and David's life insurance, you're in a position to help your brother." The world tilted on its axis. The papers in front of me blurred. It took a moment for the words to register, and when they did, a wave of nausea washed over me. They weren't just asking for money. They were calculating, appraising the value of my dead husband's life. They had looked at my tragedy and seen a business loan. This wasn't a request. It was a demand. I looked at the framed photo on the end table. David, grinning at a tailgate party, wearing his crimson and cream Oklahoma Sooners t-shirt. A life so full, so vibrant, now reduced to a dollar amount in their eyes. My own voice sounded distant, fragile. I just buried my husband and my daughter," I managed to say, my hands trembling. "I can't even think about—" Ashley cut me off, her patience wearing thin. The mask slipped, revealing the cold steel beneath. "Listen to me, Olivia," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I don't want to say this, but maybe this was God's plan. Now that you're not tied down with that little family anymore, you can focus on your real family. Helping Leo is helping our future." The air in the room froze. Every sound, every breath ceased. Tied down, little family, God's plan. The words weren't just cruel, they were monstrous. She was implying that the deaths of my husband and my child were a blessing in disguise, a convenient tragedy that freed me up to finance my brother's bar. My father, Norman, just sat there, nodding in solemn agreement. "Your mother is right," he added, his voice a low rumble. "This army career of yours is temporary. Leo's success will be the family's legacy." Something inside me, some deeply buried foundation of tolerance and long-suffering duty, didn't just crack. It shattered. It disintegrated into dust. The years of quiet resentment, of swallowed pride, of patient endurance, all of it vanished, replaced by the cold, clear fury of a soldier under fire. I stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate. My trembling stopped. My voice when I spoke was not the voice of their forgotten daughter. It was the voice of a captain giving a direct order. Every word was precise, sharp, and lethal. "Get out of my house." They stared at me, shocked into silence. My mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish. I continued, my gaze locked on them. The death of my husband and my daughter is not a business opportunity. My loyalty is to the flag I serve and to their memory, not to a family of grifters who see a death certificate as a bank statement. My father's face turned purple with rage. He stood up, towering over me. "If you don't help your brother, you are no daughter of mine," he roared. I met his glare without flinching. The last thread of fear I ever had of him snapped. "In that case, sir," I replied, my voice dangerously calm, "I've been an orphan for 2 weeks." I walked to the front door and held it open, my stance unwavering. The message was clear. There was no negotiation. For a moment, they just stood there, stunned by this version of me they had never seen. Then, wordlessly, they filed out, their arrogant confidence replaced by bewildered fury. I shut the door behind them. The click of the lock was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of the final chain breaking. The sound of my war at home officially beginning. Before we continue, if you have ever felt the rage of being so profoundly misunderstood and disrespected by the very people who should have protected you, support Olivia's stand by hitting the like button. And in the comments, just type one word that describes her family. I have a few in mind. The moment the door clicked shut, the adrenaline that had fueled my standoff evaporated, leaving a chilling emptiness in its wake. The soldier's fury was gone, and in her place was just me. Olivia. I slid down the back of the door until I was sitting on the floor, my head in my hands. The strength I had shown them was a facade, and now the curtain had fallen. I was utterly and completely alone. I had severed the toxic ties to my birth family, but the beautiful family I'd created was gone too. I was an island, adrift in an ocean of grief, surrounded by the wreckage of my own life packed neatly into cardboard boxes. The silence in the house was no longer peaceful. It was a crushing weight. In the depths of that despair, a flicker of a memory surfaced, from the funeral. Through the blur of uniforms and black suits, I recalled one face that didn't belong to a soldier or a sympathetic neighbor. It was an older man, standing quietly at the back, his weathered face etched with a pain that seemed to mirror my own. He was wearing a simple dark suit that looked out of place on his rugged frame. Uncle Hector. My father's younger brother. A man I'd only met a handful of times at awkward family Christmases. A former Marine who now lived on a ranch somewhere in the rolling hills of rural Oklahoma. He was the only Ramos who had shown up. A desperate, fragile hope sparked within me. He was still family, but he was different. He had always carried himself with a quiet dignity that was the polar opposite of my father's bluster. Clinging to that last thread, I scrolled through my phone's contacts, my thumb hovering over his name. I hesitated, my mind screaming with doubt. Why would he care? Why burden him with this ugly family drama? But the alternative, drowning alone in this silence, was worse. I pressed the call button. He answered on the second ring, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "Hector Ramos." "Uncle Hector," I began, my voice cracking immediately. It's Olivia." And then the dam broke. The composure I had maintained through the funeral, through the confrontation, it all crumbled. Sobs tore through me, raw and ragged, as I choked out the entire story. The empty chairs, the photo from Hawaii, the vile text message, and the demand for $40,000. I told him everything, shame and grief pouring out of me in a torrent of words, fully expecting judgment, or worse, for him to make excuses for his brother. But on the other end of the line, there was only a heavy, simmering silence. It wasn't awkwardness. It felt like a gathering storm. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight with a cold fury, but the words he directed at me were warmer than any I had heard in weeks. "You did nothing wrong, Olivia," he said, his tone absolute. "You listen to me now. You are a captain in the United States Army. You have served this country with honor. They are the ones who have disgraced the Ramos name. They are cowards. For the first time since this nightmare began, someone was on my side. Someone saw the truth. Someone validated not just my pain, but my worth." The relief was so overwhelming that I could only weep. Hector didn't just offer words. An hour later, my phone rang again. I'm on my way, he said. Don't you go anywhere. Be there in 3 hours. True to his word, 3 hours later, his dusty Ford F-150 pulled into my driveway. He didn't come bearing empty platitudes or awkward condolences. He came carrying a large stock pot that filled my kitchen with the rich, comforting aroma of homemade chicken noodle soup and a 6-pack of Schiener Bock beer. He set the pot on the stove to warm and twisted the cap off 2 bottles, handing one to me. We sat at my kitchen table, the silence between us comfortable, not crushing. The simple presence of this quiet, steady man was an anchor in my storm. For a long time, we just sat, the clinking of our beer bottles the only sound. Then, he started to talk. He spoke of growing up with my father, of the fundamental difference in their codes. He, a Marine, believed in a quiet, lived honor. My father, he explained, only ever cared about the appearance of it. The big house, the successful son, the perfect suburban life. Your father, my brother. He's been chasing ghosts his whole life, Olivia, Hector said, staring into his beer. The ghost of what he thinks success looks like. Your brother Leo is just the latest version of that ghost. What they did to you. It's not your fault. It's a sickness in them, a selfishness that's been growing for decades. Hearing it from him, from someone who knew their history, was like having a massive weight lifted off my soul. It wasn't me. I wasn't the problem. I wasn't the unlovable daughter. I was just born into the path of their sickness. We ate the soup straight from the pot with spoons, the warmth spreading through my chest, chasing away some of the chill that had taken root there. It was the first real meal I'd had in days. Before he left, as the evening sun cast long shadows across the lawn, Hector stood in my doorway. He looked me straight in the eye, his gaze as direct and unflinching as a drill instructor's, but filled with a profound kindness. You have skills, Olivia, he said, his voice firm. Leadership, strategic planning, risk management. The Army taught you that. But those aren't just a soldier's skills. They're a leader's skills. Don't you dare waste them sitting here in these ashes. He paused, letting the words sink in. Don't let them define you. You take what the Army gave you, and you build something for yourself. Something that would make David and Sophia proud. His words weren't a command. They were an empowerment. He wasn't telling me what to do. He was reminding me of who I was. In the wreckage of my life, he hadn't just offered a shoulder to cry on. He had handed me a blueprint. He saw me not as a grieving widow or an abandoned daughter, but as a survivor. And more than that, a warrior. A seed of an idea began to take root in my mind. My next war wouldn't be fought on a foreign battlefield. It would be fought right here, on the soil of my own life. Uncle Hector's parting words weren't just advice. They were my new mission directive. The fog of grief began to recede, replaced by the clear, sharp focus of a soldier with an objective. My kitchen, once a place of family meals and painful memories, transformed into my command center. I taped large sheets of butcher paper to the walls, not with battlefield maps, but with SWOT analyses, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. My military training became my greatest asset. My strengths were clear: leadership, logistics, security assessment, and the ability to perform under extreme pressure. I realized the skills that kept my platoon safe on dusty roads in Afghanistan could keep businesses safe on the plains of Oklahoma. The path forward was clear. I filed my resignation papers with the Army, a decision both terrifying and liberating. Using my savings and the life insurance money David had left for us, not for my brother's bar, but for our future, I took the leap. I named the company Pina Secure Solutions. It wasn't just a business name, it was an oath. A way to carry David's name forward, to build a legacy of honor on the foundations of my loss. The first few months were a solitary war of attrition. I rented a tiny, windowless office in a bland suburban office park. My life became a grueling cycle of 18-hour days, fueled by black coffee and sheer force of will. I was the CEO, the marketing department, the sales team, and the janitor. I wrote my own business plan, remembering David patiently explaining financial projections to me one night. I built my own website, channeling his lessons on basic coding. I spent hours on the phone, cold-calling businesses, my voice hoarse by the end of each day. The pushback was immediate and predictable. I was a young woman in a field dominated by older men. I'd walk into meetings with seasoned, skeptical business owners in Tulsa, men who had run their companies since before I was born. Their eyes would sweep over me, taking in my pantsuit and my determined expression, and I could see the dismissal in their posture. I remember one meeting with the owner of a large manufacturing plant. He was a classic Oklahoma good old boy, with a handlebar mustache and a patronizing smile. He listened to my pitch, then leaned back in his leather chair, looking amused. "Little lady," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "what does a girl like you know about securing a multi-million-dollar facility like this?" The old Olivia would have shrunk. The old Olivia would have stammered an apology. But the soldier in me took command. I looked him straight in the eye, my voice calm and even. "Sir," I said, "I designed and implemented the security protocols for a forward operating base in Kandahar. With all due respect, your factory is significantly less complex." His smile vanished. He sat up a little straighter. "I got the contract. But I knew I couldn't fight this war alone. An army is nothing without its soldiers. I started reaching out, not through job boards, but through my own network. I called old comrades, veterans I had served with, men and women who were struggling to find their place back in the civilian world. They were adrift, missing the structure, the purpose, and the camaraderie of the service. I didn't just offer them a job, I offered them a new mission. I gave them back the one thing we all miss the most: a team. Our office wasn't run like a typical corporation. It was run like a military unit. We were a small, elite team built on absolute trust and mutual respect. We weren't employees. We were a fire team, each member watching the other's back. Pina Secure Solutions began to grow, not through flashy advertising, but through word of mouth. Our reputation for integrity, efficiency, and an unwavering commitment to the mission became our brand. During those long nights, I found an unexpected ally in the voice of Brené Brown. I'd listen to her talks on my laptop as I worked. She spoke of courage, vulnerability, and the power of imperfection. She taught me that my grief, my scars, they weren't weaknesses to be hidden. They were the source of my strength, the proof that I had dared greatly and survived. 1 year to the day after I filed the paperwork for my company, I stood in our new office. It was on the 10th floor of a building downtown, with large windows that overlooked the Tulsa skyline. We were profitable. We had just signed a major contract to handle security logistics for a regional shipping company. It wasn't a loud, flashy victory. There was no parade, no medal ceremony. It was a quiet, profound sense of pride that settled deep in my bones. I had taken the cold ashes of my former life and, brick by painful brick, built a new foundation. I thought of something Brené Brown had said. Courage starts with showing up and letting ourselves be seen. I had shown up. I had faced the fear, the doubt, the condescension, and I had refused to back down. I was no longer a victim of my past or a prisoner of my grief. I was the architect of my own future, and I was just getting started. While I was building a new life from the ashes, the architects of my grief were watching their own world crumble. Leo's sports bar, the one meant to be the cornerstone of the Ramos family legacy, was a catastrophic failure. It folded in less than 6 months, leaving a mountain of debt in its wake. My parents, ostracized by many in their community who had heard whispers of their behavior at the funeral, found no helping hands. But the Ramos family doesn't do self-reflection. They do scapegoating, and I was their perfect target. A new war began. One fought not with direct confrontation, but with whispers and poison, a smear campaign. It started with phone calls to distant relatives. The story they spun was a masterpiece of fiction, a tragic tale of parental sacrifice and filial betrayal. In their version, I was the villain. I was the cold-hearted daughter who, after receiving a massive insurance payout, had turned her back on her struggling family. They painted a picture of me living in luxury, using my dead husband's money to fund a lavish lifestyle while my poor parents and brother faced financial ruin. The lies, coated in a veneer of parental pain, spread through the family grapevine like a virus. The truth didn't stand a chance. The first direct hit came one Tuesday evening. The caller ID showed a number I recognized. Aunt Martha, my father's older sister, the matriarch of the extended family. I answered, expecting a simple hello. Instead, I was met with a voice cold with disappointment. "Olivia," she began without any pleasantries, "I hear you're doing very well for yourself with that new company." "I'm working hard, Aunt Martha," I said carefully. "So I've heard," she sniffed. "I've also heard your parents are on the verge of losing their house because of Leo's debts. How can you be so heartless?" I was stunned. I tried to explain, to tell her about their visit, about the disgusting demand they had made. But it was like talking to a brick wall. Her mind was already made up, poisoned by their lies. "Don't forget where you come from, Olivia," she said, her voice dripping with sanctimony before she hung up. "Money changes people." The line went dead, but her words echoed in my ears. I realized with a sickening certainty that my silence had been weaponized against me. By not defending myself, I had allowed them to write their own history, and in their story, I was the monster. The final unforgivable blow came a few days later in an email from Uncle Hector. The subject line was just one word: incoming. Attached was a screenshot. It was from a private neighborhood group on Facebook for our old community in Tulsa, a place filled with former neighbors and family friends. My mother, Ashley, had written a long, rambling post, drenched in crocodile tears. She wrote of the profound, unending pain of having an ungrateful daughter. She lamented how her child had trampled on family values in the selfish pursuit of money, abandoning the very people who gave her life. It was a public performance of victimhood, designed to garner maximum sympathy and inflict maximum damage. But it was the final sentence that stopped my heart. It was the kill shot, expertly aimed. "We only pray that she remembers," my mother wrote, "that before she was a captain, she was a daughter." I stared at the words on the screen, a white-hot rage building in my chest, a fury so intense it made me feel calm. They had done it. They had taken the one thing I had built for myself, the one thing that was pure and honorable in my life, my service, my rank, and they had twisted it into a weapon to use against me. They were using my uniform to paint me as a traitor to my own family. This was no longer about money. It was no longer about a failed sports bar or family drama. This was a direct assault on my honor, an attack on my integrity, and an insult to the memory of David and Sophia, whose legacy I was trying to build. To remain silent now wasn't discipline, it was cowardice. I remembered a core principle of the Army: leave no man behind. In this war, my honor was the soldier being left behind on the battlefield, surrounded by enemy fire. My integrity was the fallen comrade they were trying to desecrate, and I would not abandon it. That afternoon, an email notification popped up. It was a digital invitation, a cheery reminder for the annual Ramos family reunion, a large gathering to be held at the Sputter, a steakhouse in Tulsa famous for its family-friendly atmosphere. The irony was suffocating. I hadn't attended in years. I stared at the invitation on my screen. Then I looked over at the photograph on my desk. David and Sophia, frozen in a moment of pure joy at a pumpkin patch. I was fighting for them now. I opened the email, my fingers steady on the keyboard. I clicked reply. I will be attending. The ghosts of my past wanted a confrontation. Fine, I would give them a war. Have you ever been the subject of a lie that was so vicious you knew you couldn't stay silent any longer? If you're standing with Olivia as she prepares for this fight, hit that like button to show your support. And in the comments, let us know with a simple yes if you believe it's time to face the liars head-on. My RSVP was a declaration of war, and a soldier does not go into battle unprepared. The week leading up to the Ramos family reunion became a military operation. I named it Operation Transparency. My objective was not revenge, it was eradication. Eradication of the lies, the false narrative, and the victimhood my parents had so carefully constructed. The only weapon I needed was the cold, hard, undeniable truth. My first phase was intelligence gathering. I called a friend from my old unit who had since become a paralegal. I asked her for a favor, to pull the public records on Leo's failed LLC and any liens or judgments against my parents. 2 days later, a thick manila envelope arrived. I spread the documents across my kitchen table. The numbers told a story of incompetence and reckless spending. Loans defaulted on, suppliers stiffed, eviction notices. It was a mountain of debt, self-inflicted and irresponsible. This was my factual ammunition, irrefutable proof that their financial ruin was their own doing, not the fault of their ungenerous daughter. As I read through the cold facts, I felt a strange detachment, the focused calm of a sniper zeroing in on a target. The next phase was gathering the emotional evidence. This was harder. It required me to open a box I had sealed shut, both literally and figuratively. It was a simple storage box labeled Memories, but it felt as heavy as a coffin. Inside were the weapons that would hit harder than any legal document. I found the screenshot of my mother's text message, the cruel words about the dreary atmosphere and cheap white lilies. I didn't just save it to a file, I printed it out on an 8x10 sheet of photo paper. I found the link to their Hawaii vacation post, the one with the timestamp that aligned perfectly with the funeral of my husband and child. I bookmarked it. I dug deeper, finding a stack of old letters from my college days, letters I'd written to my best friend. In one, I detailed how I was working 2 part-time jobs to pay for my textbooks, because all of my parents' money was being funneled into Leo's latest failed startup idea. Each memory was a bullet. I was loading the magazine, one painful truth at a time. With my arsenal assembled, I initiated the final phase, a strategy session with my sole ally. I drove the 3 hours out to Uncle Hector's ranch, the dossier of evidence on the passenger seat beside me. The air out there was cleaner, the sky bigger. It was a world away from the conflict I was preparing for. I laid everything out on his rustic wooden kitchen table. The bankruptcy filings, the printout of the text, the letters, the screenshot of my mother's Facebook post. He examined each piece of evidence, his old Marine's face growing harder, his jaw tightening with every page he turned. He read my mother's post, his lips thinning into a grim line. He didn't offer sympathy, he offered tactics. "This is good," he said, his voice a low growl. "Hard evidence. You present it without emotion, just the facts. Let them hang themselves with their own words." He looked up from the papers, his eyes meeting mine. "But you can't go in there alone. They'll swarm you, try to paint you as hysterical." He picked up his phone. "I'm coming with you, and I've already made a couple of calls. Our cousins, John and Michael. They never fully bought Norman's story. They'll be there, as witnesses." His support was more than a comfort. It was a force multiplier. This would no longer be my word against theirs. It would be the facts, corroborated by respected members of the family. He had just secured my flanks. The night before the reunion, I expected to feel anxious, a storm of nerves. Instead, I felt a profound and unsettling calm. I remembered watching a documentary once where General Patton said, "Prepare for the unknown by studying how others in the past have coped with the unforeseeable and the unpredictable." That's what I had done. I had studied my enemy. I knew their tactics. I was prepared. I meticulously organized the documents into a sleek, black leather briefcase. It felt solid and heavy in my hand. Then I chose my uniform for this battle. Not my army greens. That was Captain Pina. They needed to face Olivia Pina, the businesswoman, the woman who had built a life not just without them, but in spite of them. I chose a crisp, white button-down shirt, sharp black trousers, and low heels. Professional, unflappable, powerful. Standing in front of the mirror, I saw a woman I barely recognized from the broken soldier who had crumpled to the floor just a few months ago. The scars were still there, deep in my eyes, but they were no longer open wounds. They were reminders of battles fought and survived. My reflection didn't show a victim, it showed a commander. The next evening, I pulled up to the sputter. The ridiculous sign, a giant oil derrick, lit up the night sky. I could hear the murmur of conversations and the clinking of glasses from inside. My heart hammered against my ribs, a steady, powerful beat. This wasn't fear. It was anticipation. Uncle Hector was waiting for me by the entrance, a solid, reassuring presence in his best Western-style blazer. He simply nodded at me, a silent confirmation of our alliance. I took a deep breath, the air smelling of grilled steak and something that felt faintly like justice. I gripped the handle of the leather briefcase. Inside was my ammunition. Inside was the truth. Together, we walked toward the door. It was time to enter the battlefield. The private banquet room at the Sputter was thick with the smell of grilled steak and hypocrisy. My parents were holding court at the center table, the picture of grieving victims. My mother, Ashley, dabbed at her dry eyes with a napkin, while my father, Norman, accepted solemn pats on the back. They had set the stage perfectly. When Uncle Hector and I walked in, a hush fell over the room. Every set of eyes turned to us, a mixture of curiosity, pity, and outright accusation. I could feel their judgment like a physical force. We were the last to arrive, the villains of the play, summoned for our public execution. We took our seats at a table near the back, and the murmuring resumed. Before the appetizers were even served, Aunt Martha stood up, tapping her water glass with a spoon for attention. As the family matriarch, her words carried weight. "Family," she began, her voice full of false warmth. "It's so good to see us all together. In difficult times, family is all we have." Her eyes found me in the back of the room. "And that's why it's so important to heal rifts, to open our hearts. Olivia, dear," she said, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness. "We are all here for you. We just pray you find it in your heart to help your family, who loves you so much." The trap was set. The entire room was looking at me, waiting for me to yield, to apologize, to play my part as the cold-hearted daughter. My parents wore expressions of hopeful sorrow. They thought they had won. But before they could launch into their next act, I stood up and walked to the front of the room, my leather briefcase in hand. I placed it on the small lectern that had been set up for announcements. "Thank you, Aunt Martha," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the expectant silence. "You spoke about family. Tonight, I'd like to talk about something even more fundamental: the truth." I paused, letting my eyes sweep across the room. I had their full attention. One of our founding fathers, John Adams, once said, "Facts are stubborn things, and whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or the dictates of our passion, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence." I opened my briefcase and pulled out a small projector remote. The wall behind me flickered to life. I wasn't here to cry or to plead my case. I was here to present evidence. First, the financials. A simplified summary of Leo's business debts appeared on the screen. "You have heard that my family is in financial distress," I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. "This is true. But as the public record shows, this distress is not due to bad luck. It is the direct result of over $80,000 in defaulted loans and unpaid suppliers for a business that was mismanaged into the ground." A shocked murmur went through the room. I clicked the remote. My own company's registration appeared. "You also heard that I am living lavishly on a massive insurance payout. The truth is, Pina Secure Solutions was built from the ground up with my own savings and a small business loan. It was built with 18-hour days and the hard work of the veterans I am proud to employ." I saw my parents shifting uncomfortably. This wasn't going according to their script. "But financial truths are one thing," I continued, my voice dropping slightly. "Let's talk about emotional truths." Click. The next image filled the screen. It was my parents and Leo, beaming beside a sparkling pool in Hawaii. At the bottom of the picture, in bold, clear font, was the digital timestamp, the date of David and Sophia's funeral. The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. The air crackled with a new kind of tension, not pity for them, but dawning horror. Click. The next slide was the screenshot of my mother's text message. The words appeared, huge and damning, on the wall for everyone to see. "Finally escaped that dreary atmosphere. The white lilies there looked so cheap. A collective gasp swept through the room. The whispers started, sharp and angry. The sympathetic glances toward my mother's table transformed into looks of disgust. Ashley shot to her feet, her face pale and blotchy. That's a fake. It's photoshopped, she stammered, her voice shrill with panic. She's making it up. She's always been a liar. But her frantic denial was a confession. The terror in her eyes told the real story. And then came the final blow. From the back of the room, Uncle Hector slowly rose to his feet. Every eye turned to him. As a former Marine, his voice carried an undeniable weight of honor and authority. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. I was at that funeral, he said, his voice a low, powerful rumble that filled the entire room. He stared directly at his brother, my father. I saw the empty chairs where you were supposed to be. I saw Olivia's pain as she stood there alone, holding that flag. And I felt the shame of watching a soldier be abandoned by her own family on the worst day of her life. It was over. The final nail in the coffin of their lies. The truth, confirmed by an unimpeachable witness. Norman, Ashley, and Leo just sat there, frozen, their faces ashen. Aunt Martha stared at them, her mouth agape, her eyes filled with a horrified understanding. The tide of family opinion had turned into a tsunami, and it was crashing down directly on them. They were no longer the victims. They were the frauds, stripped bare in front of everyone. Without another word, my father clumsily pushed his chair back. My mother grabbed her purse, and Leo stumbled after them. They practically fled the room, a silent, shameful retreat under the glare of dozens of accusing eyes. They hadn't been defeated by me. They had been executed by the truth. A heavy, deafening silence settled over the room, the ghost of their lies finally put to rest. On the long, dark drive back from Tulsa to Fort Sill, Uncle Hector and I didn't say much. The adrenaline from the confrontation had faded, leaving behind a profound exhaustion that settled deep in my bones. There was no triumphant celebration, no feeling of elation. I hadn't expected to feel this way. I had expected relief, maybe even joy. Instead, all I felt was a vast, hollow emptiness. I'd spent my entire life subconsciously craving their approval, fighting for a scrap of recognition. Now, I had the validation of the entire extended family. Cousins and aunts who had previously looked at me with suspicion had come up after the showdown, offering quiet apologies and firm handshakes. I had won. But standing in the rubble of my victory, I realized the prize no longer mattered. I had won the war, but in doing so, I had officially, irrevocably lost a part of my own history. Even a toxic root is still a root. The Bible verse came to mind, the one I'd heard 1,000 times but never truly understood until now. And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. I had learned that freedom isn't always a joyous flight. Sometimes it's a painful amputation. The truth had set me free, but it had also left a phantom limb, an ache for a family that never really was. A few days later, a call came from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me press the button. Olivia? It was Leo. I didn't recognize his voice at first. The usual arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, trembling tone. Liv, please, he whimpered, and I could hear him openly sobbing on the other end. Mom and Dad are a wreck. We've lost everything. The family won't even speak to us. Everyone knows. Please, can you just forgive us? Can you help us, just one last time? I listened in complete silence, leaning against the kitchen counter. I waited to feel something, anger, satisfaction, anything. But there was nothing. Just a deep, profound weariness. His plea wasn't an apology born of remorse. It was a negotiation tactic born of desperation. They hadn't changed. They had just run out of options. He kept talking, his sobs becoming more frantic. I didn't say a word. I just quietly pressed the red button on my screen, ending the call. It wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of self-preservation. It was me, finally choosing my own peace over their chaos. That evening, I sat down at my desk with a pen and a single sheet of paper. I started writing a letter addressed to Norman, Ashley, and Leo. I didn't fill it with accusations or blame. I simply wrote. I wrote about the few good memories I could recall. Learning to ride a bike with my dad holding the seat, my mom baking my favorite cookies on my birthday. Then I wrote about the bad, the constant feeling of being second best, the lonely nights, the betrayal of my trust. I wasn't writing it for them to understand. I was writing it for me, to arrange the shattered pieces of my past into a narrative I could finally put down. At the end of the letter, I wrote the two hardest words in the English language. I forgive you. I wrote that I forgave them, not because their actions were excusable, but because I refused to carry the weight of my hatred for one more day. Forgiveness, I realized, was not about absolving them. It was about liberating myself. The final sentence was a boundary, clear and absolute. I wish you peace, but my path to finding my own peace can no longer intersect with yours. I folded the letter, slid it into an envelope, and sealed it. Then I placed it in the bottom of that same memory box and closed the lid. It would never be sent. Its purpose was served. The next morning, the Oklahoma sun was bright and warm, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. I drove to the cemetery. In my arms, I carried two large bouquets of bright, cheerful sunflowers. I knelt between the two granite headstones, the grass still cool and damp with dew. I carefully arranged the flowers, their yellow faces turned toward the sun. I traced the engraved letters of David's name with my fingertips, the stone cool and smooth beneath my skin. I didn't cry. A soft, serene smile touched my lips. We did it, David, I whispered to the stone. I told our story. I took back our family's honor. Then I turned to the smaller stone beside his. I pictured Sophia's bright, laughing eyes. You and your daddy will always be my real family, sweet girl. I stayed there for a long time, just sitting in the quiet, feeling the gentle breeze on my face. The grief was still there, a permanent part of my landscape now. But it was no longer a chain holding me down. It had become something else, an anchor, a source of strength, a reminder of a love so powerful that it was worth fighting for. And I made a promise to them, and to myself. I would live, not just survive, but truly live. A life of purpose, a life of meaning, a life that would honor the beautiful, brief time they had spent on this earth. My war was over. It was time to build the peace. 2 years have passed since that day at the Sputter. 2 years of quiet rebuilding, not on the battlefield of my past, but in the peaceful territory of my present. Pina Secure Solutions has become one of the most respected security consulting firms in the region. We're known for two things: our unwavering effectiveness and our commitment to hiring veterans. My fire team has grown into a platoon, a battalion, a family. I no longer work 18-hour days. The frantic, desperate energy of those early months has been replaced by a calm, steady purpose. I learned one of the hardest lessons for any soldier: how to delegate. I built a leadership team I trust implicitly, allowing me to focus on a new mission, one that was born from the promise I made at a graveside. When people in Tulsa see me now, they don't see a grieving widow or the subject of scandalous family gossip. They see a leader, a respected member of the business community. They see a symbol of what Oklahomans call the Oklahoma Standard: resilience in the face of devastation. Fulfilling the promise I made to my daughter, I used a portion of the company's profits to start a nonprofit foundation. I called it Sophia's Sunshine Project. It was my way of ensuring her light would never go out. We partner with incredible national organizations like TAPS, the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, to provide support for the children of fallen service members. We don't just write checks. We host summer camps, mentorship programs, and outdoor adventure weekends for Gold Star kids. My goal is simple: to bring a little bit of sunshine back into the lives of children who have known the deepest kind of shadow, the kind my own daughter never had the chance to outgrow. I attend every event, not as Olivia Pina, CEO, but just as Olivia, a friend who understands. I sit with them, listen to their stories, and share in their laughter and their tears. In the faces of these brave, resilient kids, I see a reflection of my Sophia's spirit. And in their healing, I find a piece of my own. My personal life has found a new, peaceful rhythm as well. Uncle Hector became the father I never really had. Most Sundays, I drive out to his ranch. We'll spend the afternoon fishing, or just sitting on his porch, drinking Shinerbach and watching the sunset. The comfortable silence between us saying more than words ever could. He never offers advice unless I ask for it, but his steady, unwavering presence is the bedrock of my new life. And the rest of the Ramos clan? After the truth came out, the family tree righted itself. Aunt Martha called me the week after the reunion, her voice choked with apology. She and many other cousins and relatives have slowly, carefully built a new relationship with me. They call, not out of obligation, but out of genuine affection. They invite me to holiday dinners and backyard barbecues. I don't always go, but it's nice to know the invitation is real. I found my family after all. Not one defined by blood, but one forged in truth, respect, and unconditional love. As for my parents and Leo, I hear things sometimes. Whispers. They sold the house in Tulsa and moved out of state. I don't know where, and I have no desire to find out. I hold no anger for them anymore. I simply hold nothing for them at all. They are ghosts from a different life, a war I've already won. My story ends not with a bang, but with a quiet moment of peace. I'm standing in my office late one afternoon. The Oklahoma sun is setting, casting a warm golden glow across the room, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and pink. I'm not looking at spreadsheets or profit margins on my computer. I'm looking at a wall. It used to be a blank white space. Now, it's my heart made visible. It's covered in photographs. There's no order to them, just a beautiful, chaotic collage of my life. There's a picture of David and Sophia at that pumpkin patch. Their smiles so bright they could power a city. There's a group shot of my team from Pina Secure Solutions, my fellow veterans, laughing during our company picnic. There's one of me and Uncle Hector holding up a ridiculously small fish on one of our fishing trips, both of us grinning. And scattered all around are photos from Sophia's Sunshine Project. Kids canoeing, climbing a rock wall, roasting marshmallows over a campfire, their faces filled with pure, unadulterated joy. I reach out and my fingertips gently trace the frame of David and Sophia's picture. A soft smile touches my lips. I took the deepest pain a person can endure and transformed it into purpose. I took an unbearable loss and turned it into a living legacy. I am Olivia Pini. I am a soldier, a leader, a mother. But above all else, I am a survivor who finally wrote the last chapter of her own story. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but I shared it in the hope that it might reach someone who feels unseen, unheard, or defined by their pain. My journey taught me that we are not the architects of our trauma, but we can be the architects of our healing and our legacy. The fight for your own peace is the one war you can't afford to lose. If my story resonated with you, please consider hitting subscribe and turning on notifications. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and let us know your final thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters here.